Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host Todd Tavares. This podcast moves beyond questions of God's existence to ask, what's next in a godless world? If you're enjoying the show so far, remember to like and subscribe, rate and review, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Beyond Atheism is produced and distributed by Atheist United Studios.
Today, we take some time to reflect on the challenges of first becoming an atheist, recognizing what the change from being religious to becoming irreligious entails, what is kept and what is lost personally and socially, is important to moving beyond atheism. As nuns, those without a religion, continue to grow rapidly, it is vital to consider what is at stake as more and more people deconvert. To discuss the process of deconversion, we are joined by the Graceful Atheist, David Ames. As a host of Graceful Atheist podcast, David elicits long-form deconversion stories from the newly formed small a atheists. He explores the motivations for leaving a faith and the challenges people face once they decide to leave. Additionally, David is also an organizer. He brings together recent deconverts online to share stories, offer support, and build a community. David, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Hey, thank you guys. Really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, love to see you again. This is great.
Yeah, I really had fun talking to you guys when you were on my podcast, and I'm glad to reciprocate.
Yeah, it's good to be able to turn the tables on you, I guess.
Yeah.
So when Todd and I were on, I guess it was a few months ago, you asked us about kind of our deconversion stories, and so I wanted to ask the same of you. I guess maybe I'll just leave it at that. No more preamble. Tell us about your kind of deconversion story.
Yeah. I kind of have to tell the conversion story to begin with, because I didn't grow up in a strong Christian household. It was nominally Christian at best. We talked about God every once in a while. I was pretty curious. I was kind of constantly asking my mom, my grandmother, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? But never, taking that on personally. I had, a vague sense that maybe God existed, but it wasn't very serious for me at all. But my mom had a lot of drug and alcohol problems. And when I was 17, she said, Jesus told me to get clean and sober. And I was like, yeah, right, sure. But she did, the next day she was sober, the next day. And, that has a pretty big impact on you. So she handed me a Bible and asked me to, if I was interested, very low key, I could look into it, which I did. I read through it in about a year on my own. And so before really having church exposure, I had read through the Bible. And so church was kind of a culture shock.
Wow.
So this whole thing about grace is really from almost day one was that, I felt like the church was missing the grace of the Gospels and that God had called me to tell them about it, to remind them, right? Like to remind them. I'll try to make the story short. I had a youth pastor who was a pretty good mentor, decent mentor, and, said, hey, you could probably go to college for this. So I found myself in Bible college.
Wow.
Where I, really thrived. I say it was the best of times. It was the worst of times in the sense that the worst was that it was kind of infantilizing. You're in your early 20s and, you're being treated like a child. But I say that my professors did too good a job. They taught critical thinking, really good exegesis and hermeneutics, and they did too good a job, right? So
yeah. Here
I have to fast forward. I went into ministry, had some squabbles there. Things didn't go well.
David, let's back it up, because you touched on something that I'm super interested in, and this I kind of feel like it's kind of a prophecy about your future. Prophecy might be too strong a word. Foreshadowing your future, where you read the Bible and you're like, all right, I'm in, and then you go to church and it's like, whoa, something's wrong. What kept you going back to church? What is it that pulled you into the church and made you, because you were there for what, like 20 years, right?
Yes. I remained a Christian for quite a long time. That's a great question. I think the sense of belonging, it's a lot of what I talk about. We're going to get to in the secular world is you immediately have people who say they love you. And even in this good scenario, I'm talking about this youth pastor, giving you a sense of purpose, right? Like you could be this leader, and then having your peers feed that back to you. So in Bible college, I did well, and like my peers recognized that, and it's the a cis white man, in the church does pretty well, right? Things go pretty well for you. And having said that, I did ministry for a couple of years, and it ended poorly. I wound up having a consensual relationship with a mother in the youth group, which, as you can imagine, was frowned upon. That ended that. But that didn't stop my faith. Like I had this, deep and profound sense of God's presence and God's grace. And I still felt like, to whatever extent, this is the thing I'm going to spread, right? I got married, had kids. My wife is very much still a believer, which I'm sure we'll discuss. But, 20 years go by. And I say all the time, I like to quote my friend, Matthew Taylor, that I suddenly became aware that I no longer believed, but the suddenly describes the awareness, not the process, right? It was 1,000 things over those 20 years. And it was slowly deconstructing without knowing what the word deconstructing was at all. Like never heard the word. A couple of the last things, a few of the last straws were, I read through the Bible again a couple of years before. And, every night I'd read my section, and my wife was like, "You seem angry. Why are you angry?" And it was that I had really read it for the first time without the rose-colored glasses, without reading it through the filter of my understanding of grace. What does it actually say? And I was becoming pretty horrified by what it actually says. And then, exposure to a couple of atheist thinkers. And here I don't mean like, the Four Horsemen or anything, just like people online, right? That would just say something. And I think, I don't completely disagree with that. And then at the very end was a Greta Christina article about the non-existence of the soul. And she was talking about, we are our bodies, we are our brains. And I realized I really agreed with everything she said. And another article that was about why atheists are angry. And I thought, I actually agree with everything you're saying here. And in kind of rapid succession, I had this moment of, I don't have a soul. I don't believe. My reasons for the resurrection are no good. I'm done. I'm an atheist now. So it was that awareness was very sudden, but I can see now the markers of how I got there.
Right. And the way you describe it sounds like a foundation just crumbling before
yes,
the whole house collapses.
It felt pretty rapid. Yeah. I would say that in the last year, I was even saying to people around me, believers around me, I was hinting that, I had deconstructed, the authority of the Bible and a bunch of other things. I was saying, I still have that, what Descartes talked about, the sensus divinitas, that like I had this sense of God's presence still, and I couldn't let that go. And in that moment, it was realizing, well, everyone feels that, the Muslim feels that, the Christian Scientist feels that, everyone feels that. So how do I know that mine is right? And it was realizing it's not. So I kind of did an outsider test of faith on myself without knowing what that was. And, and just saying, okay, I'm only going to believe things that I have evidence for.
Right. And were you still ministering at this point?
No. So again, the ministry ended many years ago.
Because
So in between time, I had done, I taught Bible studies, and I was always. It's hard for me not to be opinionated and lead things, but not in official ministry at all ever again.
But you're still a church member. You're still a believer. You're still
at the time
a member. Yes. You're still behaving and belonging to a community. You still attend, but everything is kind of, all of that foundation is eroding, and you're finding yourself not a believer. So then, I mean, the next step must have been, one, like the awareness. That's got to be pretty difficult. You've built, at this point, it had been decades of
Yeah.
your
About
identity.
27 years, roughly, something in that neighborhood.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lifetime. And
Yeah.
then suddenly did you feel, and the awareness made you feel like it's gone? What's the next step? Did you come out and tell your wife, tell your family and friends that you no longer believe?
So yeah, the first thing I want to say is that, part of, and again, we're going to get to why we're trying to build these communities for people that go through this process, is that it feels incredibly lonely. You feel like you can't tell anyone this information because, and it's not even limited to the believers. The other atheists, people who grew up atheists all their life, they don't get it either, right? They're like,
Yes.
so they're like, what? I don't care, it just isn't a thing, but you've had your entire life in this, and all of a sudden everything's changed. So the first thing was that I was really surprised I hadn't really changed, right? This belief changed, but my morality was the same. I still had this conception of grace, the human to human grace. All of that remained the same. So the quick version of the story is, I didn't tell anybody for about 3 months. I was quietly reading now I'm reading The Fourth Horseman and, and things on humanism and, just voraciously, gathering information. And I had to tell my wife, I couldn't not do that. There are people who don't tell their partners, and that's valid. I couldn't do it. And so I distinctly remember my palms are sweating as I'm talking about it, just bracing to tell her, easing into it by saying, I think I'm having some doubts, which was a gross understatement.
Yes.
And, lots of tears and, trying to say, that I love her for who she was, not for what she believed. And that I was committed to the relationship. The main thing I needed her to know is I wasn't going anywhere unless she kicked me out. And it was, it was rough for a while, and there are still flare-ups, but we, consciously, explicitly say, we are, that we love each other and we're committed to the relationship because of who the other person is, not because of belief. So, and then, I told my best friend, I told, an aunt, and almost everyone was good about it. Nobody, there were no harsh words from anyone. Although I'm a pretty private person, so I wasn't blasting this on Facebook.
Right.
So, I was definitely safe people to talk to. Having said that, nobody really understood either. Nobody asked questions, really. I have one aunt who was curious and would ask questions, and everyone else, it's like crickets. So,
yeah. How long ago did this happen? And then how did you go sort of from kind of just deconverting to then deciding to host a podcast about this topic?
Yeah. So June 2015. I don't remember the exact day, but definitely the time period. And so what is that? We're coming on. I can't do math. 8 years. Just about it. We're coming up to 8 years. Yeah. So, and it feels like yesterday, or honestly, like that time from that perspective seems like it just flew by. Like I say, I was definitely in an information gathering phase. So I was reading things. I was online. What I immediately saw was, debate and really aggressive, like anti-Christian and pure philosophy, and if you don't have a PhD in philosophy, you can't even talk to us kind of thing. And I thought, there's gotta be other people who are not philosophers who have gone through this, who are having this kind of, also the emotion of the loss, the grief of the loss. So I'm experiencing all of that. The loss of, I attended church for a while afterwards, but that felt hollow and empty and painful. It was, so you've lost community, you've lost, a sense of connection to some of the people that you love the most. You've lost a best friend, in my case, I thought I had this personal relationship. So it's a whole lot of grief. Right. And I just thought, there's gotta be other people that feel this way. And, and so I say, this is my a cognitive bias or motivated reasoning, that I thought there must be someone else out wants to talk about this way or hear about this. So I started with online on Twitter. I started a blog in 2016, so about a year later. I'm not a great writer. I knew I wasn't a great writer, so the blog was like, a few people took a look at it, but and then a couple of friends online, we started a thing called Secular Hangouts. We were doing it on YouTube. As you might know, YouTube, like doing video is an order of magnitude more difficult than audio. And I was like, on YouTube at the time, it was very much the 3 hours of people just shooting the breeze, and I hated that. I hated it. I'm like, I'll hang out with you for 3 hours, but I don't want to record that, So, so I had a vision for what I wanted to do, and I'm like, well, let's see. What if I start a podcast? So, now everyone thinks this. Everyone says, I'll start a podcast.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the hard part
we know
is
that experience.
yeah, exactly. The hard part is not doing the podcast. The hard part is getting people to listen to it. So I think the magic for the Graceful Atheist podcast was the focus on regular people. Typically you go after the big names in atheism or humanism. You get like the authors and the speakers and that kind of thing. And I did a little bit of that. I really love that. But I also had people tell their own story. And as I was listening to people tell me their stories, that was the magic. That was like, oh, this is it. This is the thing I'm trying to get across about secular grace and caring for each other. Like,
well, that I think is part of the magic sauce as well. Did any of this overlap with you attending church? Were you still in church when you started at least the blog? Were you recording?
Probably the blog. Probably the blog. Not very much longer after that. Obviously,
so there's so that progression makes a lot of sense. How did that go over with friends and family when you stopped attending church?
A lot of that was my wife, right? Like I was doing that to support her. She started to have a bit of spotty attendance, and then the pandemic hit. So, she is back now, going to a different church. I'm trying to think the pertinent details here. We had a kind of a beloved senior pastor that retired, and the new guy was very evangelical business model, counting, everyone. And that started to deteriorate for my wife. So we kind of stopped prior to the pandemic. So, there was no reason for me to go. And, so there was very little comment there. Right. And then by that time, my family knew, and there just wasn't an issue.
So that worked out. But it's interesting too, that you kind of start and end your adventure in Christianity with the same thing, this idea of grace, which is neat, because when I first heard of the podcast and first listened, and even the title, it's your identity now, Graceful Atheist, it seemed like, okay, like this is something fascinating. It comes from church, right? That's my first take. But but you said that when you found it in the Bible and then didn't find it in church. Like, I don't want to say if there's anything you've kept from your faith. No, I'll ask the important part. Tell us then about this idea of grace. What is the idea of grace? And we'll go from there.
Yeah. Let me talk about the Christian version of it, and then I'll talk about some secular versions of it. So,
yes, that sounds great.
Going back to that 17-year-old reading the Bible for the first time, my exposure to Christianity was a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of other people saying they were Christians and, sleeping with their girlfriends and,
or mothers.
I was doing too. So I'm no judgment, but my point is they were saying they were better, they were asserting their betterness. And so like a lot of hypocrisy, and obviously, people on TV and things like that. And I just had a really bad sense of that. So when I read the Gospels, particularly the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talking about whitewashed tombs, they are hypocrites. He's calling them out. And he's saying, I came for the sick and not the well. Man, that's good stuff. That sounds true to me. I wanted to, that's what I wanted. So that's the kind of grace that I had. And the thing that really deeply influenced that was even prior to church, even prior to reading the Bible necessarily, was the 12 steps version of this is, watching, because I actually, went to a few meetings and things like that to support my mom. Somebody gets up and they talk about just having done horrendous, terrible things, hurt people, and the that group is caring for them and loving them anyway. It's radical acceptance, right? It's not saying it's okay. It's not saying it was good. It's accepting the person, right? And it's that grace that I was trying to pull into to the church, which I thought they didn't quite get. I thought it was there in Jesus, but wasn't in practice. And so fast forward when I realize I can no longer believe, that sense of the human need for acceptance, my own need for acceptance, my own need for love. I realized that, that's what I was seeing in the Bible. I realized in retrospect, I was a religious humanist, and now I am a secular humanist. And it was just,
Yeah.
it was just recognizing the base needs of human beings, and that being a trustworthy person people can talk to is super powerful, right? And that's basically it in a nutshell. Is just being vulnerable, allowing people to be vulnerable with you, and earning that trust. And like I say, when I'm having somebody tell their story on the podcast, there's a bit of that happening, and you can literally feel it. I hope you can hear it. I definitely feel it while it's happening.
Oh yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, they're incredibly powerful stories, and we've definitely we'll talk more about them. But I do want to know a little bit more about like
Sure.
what's building up to not just the podcast, but how your history informs you. Because it's a fascinating thing to see here now that it sounds like this grace has very humanist roots, right? You go to a supportive community, they support each other. And then you find that in the Bible, and then you don't find that in religion. And that's, to me, it's so counterintuitive. It's the opposite of what I would expect.
Yeah.
But now there's got to be something, David, from the 27 years in the church, going to a religious institution for education. What are the things that you took from your religious, your lived experience as a church member, as a minister? Has there been something that you've brought from that, right? That's become part of you. It's informed how you live your life. And it's something that you feel you're bringing to the podcast as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, it would be silly to say that I don't. And again, this is my criticism of some of the atheist community, is this denial of anything that could be called religion. I like to say, everything is flipped over for me in the sense that I think that everything is secular. Religion is secular. Religion is human beings trying to get together and figure stuff out and to care for each other, right? So in that light, anything that works, I'm going to take. So when I say secular grace, for some people they get it. They immediately understand what I mean. For others, I could talk for hours and they're never going to get it, and that's fine. It's not for them. It's not a big deal. If that's not for you, that's great. You don't need it. Move on. That's not a big deal. But for the people who do get it, and that means something to them, it's useful for them to realize that it wasn't tied to Christianity. I don't need to lose grace when I let go of Christianity. But to answer more of the heart of your question, I mean, for sure, the all the Bible study, all the leading groups, speaking in front of people, all of those skill sets come across when you're doing a podcast, when you're trying to build some community. I haven't said yet, but I really want to make clear here that Arlene is our community manager and she's really the reason why the community works. I barely have enough time to do the podcast, so I don't want to take too much credit there. I just try to support that any way I can, and try to develop the attitude that is present in the group.
Yeah, maybe we can talk more about that group. So you're talking about the Deconversion Anonymous Facebook page. Maybe just talk more about how that group got started and I mean, like just sort of being mostly a lurker on the page, like it seems like, people get a ton of benefit from this group. So yeah, talk about the group, how it got started, and
Yeah.
so on.
So first, the name Deconversion Anonymous. You can hear the 12 steps background in there. The thing that way back when I was doing the YouTube stuff, that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be safe for people. Obviously, you're going to have the people who are out and loud and they've got their own YouTube channel, and that's great. But again, my point was there's got to be lots of people who don't want to be content creators who still need the community and you need to be able to talk about these things. So I wanted to make it clear we're not going to out you. This is a safe place. You can talk about doubt. You can talk about deconstruction. You can talk about being out and out atheists. And we try to be a safe place for all of that, right? Which is challenging. So we have some believers that are there, and then some people that have been out for a decade or more, and trying to balance that it can be a bit of a challenge. But
what do you mean by believers? People who are not, people who are, their faith is challenged and fracturing, or is that
yeah,
where they're
we're
at?
at least trying. We're making the effort to be. If you're a Christian right now and you've got some doubts and you just can't talk about it with your friends and family, like we're trying to be a safe place for you, and we are not going to try to deconvert you. We're going to just support you and maybe point you at resources.
Really?
So that's the goal. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Because I mean, this is something that's it's definitely outside my experience. Even having doubts, even just bringing up questions or concerns about their faith, that presents a risk to their standing in the religious community.
Yeah. Now, of course, I'm being quite evangelical centric. I know, Todd, your background is Catholicism, like maybe not as intense there, like in the, conservative evangelical world. Yes, expressing doubt is not safe. It is definitely not safe. And, the evangelical church they talk about doubt. They talk about the dark night of the soul, but there are definite limits on that. And so if you just keep asking, or if you ask the wrong questions, it is very clear. And we talk about this a lot, that it may not be overtly stated, but it is definitely implied very strongly that the person is out of bounds. And so, again, we're trying to be a place where that is okay. You can express that, and wherever you land is fine.
And that's part of how secular grace works, right?
Yes.
It's not just for the secular. And I mean, bringing up these different communities like the evangelicals, one of the fascinating things about your podcast is that you cast a very wide net. There are lots of different religions, lots of different subgroups in the religion. You talk to a lot of different people, and it's immediate, like how everyone's journey is unique. All right. Everybody walks down this path alone. But you've done over 150 episodes. You must have this. Do you have a bigger picture? Do you see that there are these commonalities to deconversion, that everybody has the same experience, even though there are these unique features for everyone? What are those commonalities?
Yes, many, many commonalities. And I like to say that I think I've generalized even more. It's not just religion, but any authoritative community of any kind. I had Alice Gretchen on, and she talked about a very culty acting class she was in. So it really isn't about religion. It is about control, right? And so the experience of coming out of those kinds of environments, whether it was pretty casual and you just decided at 12 that you don't believe, you have some residual bits from that. Or if you're like me, you lived in it for 27 years, you're going to have a lot. I want to preface this and say that, there's been a number of attempts to kind of catalog the steps, the process of deconstruction or deconversion, which I have done as well. But I like to say that there's no way that you can capture the entire spectrum of the human experience. So, so I may mention a few things here, but like, if the listener, if that wasn't your experience, great, you're unique, you're a human being. So, But I talk about, I have a blog post called How to Deconvert in 10 Easy Steps. And it was a joke title. I was young. But it's Google SEO. I can't change it. But it's talking about the cognitive dissonance that we experience and the steps that kind of begin to break that up. In the beginning, you're totally happy in your faith, and the answers from your tradition are satisfying. They feel true. You feel like you're a part of it, and everything's great. And then I talk about some precipitating event, right? It can be a tragedy. It could be, the loss of a loved one. It can be, something financial happens to you, anything, or just a regular old, doubt. You run into something that just doesn't quite make sense. It doesn't fit. And there are lots of analogies for this, but we often we take that in, we recognize that doesn't quite fit, and then we ignore it. And there's some analogies, we put that up on the shelf. It's the exceptions to the rule of faith is one author's version of this, but these things happen, we have doubts, and then we ignore them. And after a while, you get to kind of a critical mass of, now you're collecting 50 of these things, 100 of these things, and they're starting to mass up. And the cognitive dissonance, which is this idea of holding kind of two opposing beliefs at the same time, begins to be a problem. You start to sense something's not right. Things aren't working the way I expect them to, right? And this might be your dark night of the soul. This might be, and what typically happens is this doubling down. I'm going to read my Bible more. I'm going to pray more. I'm going to go to church every day, every time the doors are open, right? So
right.
Instead
you internalize it as a personal weakness.
Yeah, it's my fault. I'm wrong, right? Yeah, absolutely. And this is super common. And again, that doubling down aspect is really common. People jump into ministry, they go on missions trips, all kinds of things. They're trying to satisfy the gnawing feeling that things aren't quite right. And of course, that generally makes it worse. So I don't recommend going to Bible college or going on the mission field if you are in the, even thinking about deconstructions. It will accelerate that quite a bit. At some point, you get to a point that I call permission to doubt. There's an old xchristian.net forum that calls this "Curiosity Killed the Cat." And I love that. That captures it. It's like you don't tell anybody, but you'll read this article that is maybe slightly negative, and you just start to say to yourself, all right, I've got to at least find the answer to this. Another really common thing here is that people go to apologetics. They think, well, I don't know the answer, but clearly someone else does. And I have bad news for you. When you when you start digging into apologetics, you find out the weakness of apologetic arguments. And for most of that 20 some odd years, I was fairly educated, but I always believe there's someone smarter than me who knows the answer to this, who has a much more solid answer than I've heard thus far. And so when you go to actually find that, you realize it's assertions all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. There's nothing there. And it is so unsatisfying. And so this permission to doubt thing really explodes, right? And you just, at that point, you're really into full blown deconstruction, and you're starting to ask yourself, what do I believe? What don't I believe? Is the Bible authoritative? Is it inspired? For many people, again, to be evangelical specific, they've been told the Bible is inerrant. It has no errors, no contradictions. That is hard to uphold. That is a really difficult one to keep a hold of. And so people start to let go of those things, right? They become LGBT affirming. They liberalize a bit, right? In this deconstruction process. I also like to acknowledge there can be this kind of, I'm in faith, I'm out of faith, I'm in faith, this in between space. People don't quite know. I don't know what to say about myself. That happens a lot. But eventually, for those of us who do deconvert, we cross some line. And for me, it was that sudden awareness. And for Matthew, it was that sudden awareness. For others, it might be a slow recognition and over a long period of time. It doesn't have to be sudden. But eventually, you acknowledge internally to yourself, I don't believe anymore. And it doesn't matter if you call yourself an atheist or a non-theist or a none, or it doesn't matter what term you like. If you like agnostic, doesn't matter. At some point, you admit to yourself, my traditions, truths, I don't agree with anymore. And you're on the other side at that point. and then what do you do, right? So really common at this point is the grief I talked about, the loss, the just we've let go of community and this sense of closeness to God, and maybe a sense of purpose, right? Some people, like, that was everything to them. Like, God wanted me to do XYZ, and I've been doing XYZ, and now I don't want to do XYZ anymore.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? Right? Like,
Yeah.
like that is a lot of loss. So there's this time of just grief and feelings and the human experience of all of this, right? After that, and again, these don't have to be in order. And like, people will come back and be like, "Well, I did this." It's like it's fine. I'm trying to roughly describe the process that many people go through, but you get to this information gathering stage. So for me, it was when I actually did read the Four Horsemen. Right? It was reading books. It was watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts. You've given yourself permission to doubt. Maybe you've decided you don't believe. Now you're just like, okay, what does this all mean? And you're finding external sources of, maybe it's philosophy. Maybe you go back to philosophy, like you're just, the things you weren't allowed to go explore, now they're open, and you're going, and you're just figuring it all out. And that lasts forever. But I love one of our community members, Lars, he called it rage learning. So he had been taught, young earth creationism. So he was rage learning evolution and science, and just, like, that's a really good description of it. You're just like, all this stuff that I wasn't allowed to know about.
You jump in the deep end and
Yeah,
just
go for it.
Learn to swim. Yeah,
Exactly.
swim
Absolutely.
everywhere.
And then I like to point out that, up until this point, you may not have told another living soul. You may be in the closet still, and that's fine, and you can remain so forever. And if your security or safety is in question in any way, if you're a minor living at religious parents' house, or if you're in a country that has blasphemy laws or that kind of thing, then you should be quiet for the rest of your life until you have safer circumstances. But eventually, you probably want to tell someone else, and that person should be utterly trusted, right? Like, that should be your ride or die friend, someone who is not going to blast you, and not try to correct you. They're just going to listen and let you tell them, right? And that is a big moment. That is a big moment. When you, especially if that person is trustworthy and you feel that acceptance, again, that secular grace, that's very cathartic. It's again, part of the magic of what we're doing on the podcast is people are telling their story, maybe not for the first time, but they're telling it, and it's just very, very cathartic to do, right? And then after that, it is, what is next? It's what you guys are doing on Beyond Atheism, right? What does it mean to be a secular person who cares about ethics and morality and maybe politics, and how am I going to use this, all that sense of purpose that I had before, in some new secular way, right? And part of that is finding secular community, finding people who get you, who understand you, and part of that is finding ways that you can give back too, right? Like, I like to say that religion doesn't own morality, religion doesn't own gratitude, religion doesn't own service, volunteerism, right? You can do all of those things. You get to keep all that stuff on this side of deconstruction, deconversion.
Right. Yeah. The abyss of freedom doesn't need to be an abyss.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And to be more explicit, right? Like, the theistic world will present this as a decision between theism and nihilism. And I'm trying to say, you don't have to be nihilistic, right? You can still care about the world and people, and I'm using nihilism in the colloquial sense, not the exact sense. But you don't have to think, everything is meaningless and everything is void. You can have, or I feel like I have, at least, a sense of, not that there's inherent purpose in the universe, but that people are meaning makers, and we make meaning with one another, and it is that collaborative community sense that I think is the most impactful.
Definitely. I mean, we've heard similar sort of outlines for the process that were like academic and much shorter. But what you're describing is so personal. Like there's a lot more power to that. I really feel it. Yeah.
I definitely, that was intentional. Again, talking about the kind of hyper rational debate culture and realizing that there's more to it than that, that there's the full range of the human experience of going through the process. So,
right. Yeah. And it's also, I think part of this is it really helps explain that gulf that you felt. Nathan and I have felt it as well, between people who have deconverted and people who were born and raised secular, born without religion. And what would you, to those people, to those particular brand of atheists, what advice would you offer to them? Perhaps this is the best way to frame it, to be more welcoming to other atheists. What's the thing that they need to know? Is there something?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Lots. Like, again, I would just call to their own empathy and humanity that gets questioned by maybe the theists they argue with, right? So if you feel that, then imagine the person who's been in the middle of the theism and come out of it. One of the myths that I like to address is that this has nothing to do with intelligence. So atheists are wrong when they say theists are stupid, right? It's the wrong framing. It misunderstands. If you don't get that you yourself have cognitive biases, that you have blind spots, you're the problem, not the other people, right? And so it's just recognizing this person had this particular blind spot for a while in their life, and maybe they no longer have that. That's good. That should be celebrated. And so being accepting and welcoming and empathetic of that is the main thing that I would say.
Fantastic. All right. Nathan, should we move on to Can a True Atheist?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, because I think one of those was just addressed. Nathan, do you want to set it up and start the first question?
Yes. So we do a game on the show called Can a True Atheist, which you probably know.
Yeah.
David. We're going to change it for you slightly to Can a True Graceful Atheist. So, okay. Okay, so can a true graceful atheist believe in God?
That's a great question. I mean, words have to have some meaning, and I think again, I would go. Where I will hedge on this is I will talk about that liminal in between. People are definitely in a spot where they don't know if they believe or not, and so that's definitely possible. But I think once the point somebody starts using the term atheist, that generally implies that they no longer believe.
So have you seen that? I'm curious now, because this is something we've been finding that that exactly that line, right? Like where it is and when people realize it. And like even you had that moment of awareness, and that may have been much longer after you were already beyond belief. Have you in any of the groups sort of been witness to someone who came in with doubts and was like, yeah, I believe in God. And then within a few weeks or months, they were like, you know what, I'm out. I realize now that I don't.
I'm sure that has happened. I don't know that I have an example off the top of my head. I know there's a few people who are actively involved in various other communities as well that explicitly cater to young earth creationism, things like that. And they have definitely seen that take place as people begin to let go. What often the kind of the sweet spot is people who are spiritual but not religious. They are, they've definitely kind of let go of Christianity. They're done with that. They've deconstructed Christianity, but they're not yet letting go of all supernaturalism, that kind of thing. And I have seen some people that kind of progress out of that and finally say, you know what, I don't think so anymore. So
that's wild. Yeah. All right. Here's a curveball. Can a true graceful atheist eat meat?
Yes, I hope so. I can't remember if that's one of the discussions that we all had. Yes, I mean, I'm still a carnivore. I've said, I've talked about that. I don't think that is the most ethical of stances. But I think that the vegetarian and in particular, and veganism have a strong argument, have a very strong ethical argument. So I hope so is my answer to that question.
Right. Okay. Can a true graceful atheist be scared of dying?
Oh yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is in secular movies and content of TV, that kind of thing. There are constant elements about the fear of death, the human fear of death, and that is just built into us, right? And so to deny that is silly. I don't personally dread, I don't think about it often, right? So I'm not staring into the abyss of my mortality every day, but that does tend to focus your sense of purpose and meaning while you are here and have time. But again, I've been fascinated. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. How often there are, time travel movies or science fiction, reaching beyond the veil. There's all these secular examples of the exact same desire that is within religion. So this is a human thing, not a religious thing. And so the fear of death is just a part of the human experience.
All right. I don't feel so bad about myself now. David, can a true graceful atheist share memes making fun of religion?
Oh, that's a good one. I've tried really hard. For Arlene and I would have this explicit discussion of we really didn't want another Facebook group that devolves into anti-Christian memes. Now, we don't always live up to that. So as I talked about, trying to cater to both the doubting believer and the people that need to vent. They just need to vent. And that is an honest thing. The anger is real. I haven't addressed this yet, but to say that, the anger that we experience is valid and it's okay to be angry. And sometimes that anger helps you get away. It's that I don't want you to live in that forever, right? I don't want you there 10 years from now in the same level of anger, right? So yes, you need the opportunity to vent. Yes, a graceful atheist can share a mean meme. Should you do that all the time? Probably you should let go of realizing, that's for you. It's not for the people that you think are going to see it.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good point. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Okay. Can a true graceful atheist not tell their friends and family that they're no longer religious? If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Definitively, yes. So again, I have friends who didn't tell their spouses for years. I'll refer back to the safety thing again. If any safety concerns of any kind, you have no obligation. And then a topic that we talk about a fair amount is the sanctity, if I can use that word, of your own mind, the privacy of your own mind. You do not owe anyone to let them into your most secret thoughts. And so I put atheism or non-belief in that category. If you're not ready to tell someone, then you are not obligated. You don't owe it to them in any way. And we must have the privacy of our own thoughts and guard that as sacred, even right? As as something that is, again, what it means to be human, right? And we choose to allow people into our inner thoughts when they are trustworthy, when they've proven themselves to be trustworthy.
Well, okay, I have a follow-up that I just thought of. Then do you think it would ever be right to out an atheist if there was someone you knew they were an atheist and then you saw them?
No, I mean, I think this is exactly the same category as LGBTQ. Like if you out somebody when they're not ready, that is doing harm to that person. And again, I often generalize beyond religion, right? This is beyond religion. If there were anything that a person wanted to keep private and you out them about that, that's just being a bad human. That is not being empathetic. It's not being secular grace.
All right. Well, then how about this? Can a true graceful atheist miss church?
Yes. Yeah. So again, I think there are a number of people that continue to go to church. I think
They still
that
attend.
yeah, and I'd flip this around too, and I would say that I think the church would be surprised how many non-believers they have in their pews, and this includes everything from an out and out atheist to just kind of passively no longer believes, right? Like I think there are many more non-believers sitting in pews than the believers are aware of. The community aspect is the thing that people miss the most. Why we're trying to do Deconversion Anonymous. It is very difficult to do when you don't have some driving aspect force that's compelling people to be together. In the secular world, that's hard. So some people intentionally, consciously continue to go to maybe a slightly less conservative, or maybe they try a high church rather than a more evangelical or what have you. But they go somewhere because they need to be a part of a community, and it's more about people than say what's being preached from a pulpit.
Yeah, and I agree. I think one of the most difficult things for the sort of like young atheists, people challenging it, and in that church, and you look around and you see everybody nodding and smiling and everything, and you have no idea that there are other people experiencing the exact same thing that you are at that exact moment, and you just can't know, and that's part of the way that churches function.
And ironically, my previous guest was Rachel Hunt from Recovering from Religion, and she said exactly that. She said because the ability to express doubt is repressed in believing communities, you could be sitting right next to somebody who's having as serious doubts as you are, and you would never know it, right?
Yep. Or they could be at the pulpit.
Absolutely.
Which is another thing that happens. Yeah.
The Clergy Project is absolute evidence of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I think it's not symmetrical. Like I don't think among atheist groups or something like that, there's closeted Christians. Maybe there are, but not nearly as many as in the reverse. Yeah. All right. And okay, last but not least, can a true graceful atheist do it alone?
So I'll hedge and just say yes and no. Yes, in the sense, okay. Like again, I spent that first 3 months totally alone, and most people, back to the internal thoughts, most people go through that process alone. But we are social creatures. We need other human beings, and so community is really important. It may not be as important for everyone. So some people might be able to go through this on their own, and it's not a big deal. And they're also like, people that are just like, they're atheists, but that's not their identity, right? They just no longer believe, and they just go about their business, right? Like not everyone will need to be a part of a secular community, an explicitly secular community, and that's fine. That is totally okay.
Mm-hmm. David, this has been amazing, which is not a surprise at all, having spoken with you before. This has been really great. It's super insightful. We love the podcast. We love the work that you're doing. We love the community that you've built online. And we know how much it means to the people who are part of it. It's really fantastic. And I can't say enough great things about the work you've done. We'll give you the last word. And are there anything upcoming, anything you want to plug, any links you want us to put below?
So I've got a couple of really good interviews coming up. I interviewed Jennifer Michael Hecht, who wrote my favorite book for all of this, Doubt History, but she recently wrote a book called The Wonder Paradox that if I tell you it's about poetry, it kind of like, don't worry. Like it's good. It's amazing. It's awe-inspiring. It's everything that Jennifer, brings to the table is just amazing. And then Arlene did an interview with, why am I blanking on his name? David Hayward, who is the Naked Pastor, very famous in the deconstruction community. So those are coming up probably in the March timeframe. Love for everyone to check that out. You can find my blog and episode notes at gracefulatheist.com. And I am on Twitter, but that's kind of started to decrease these days as at Graceful Atheist.
Fantastic. Thanks again, David.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, that was David Ames, the Graceful Atheist.
Mm-hmm. God, he's so good, isn't he?
Yeah, I know. The time flew by. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a great voice for it. He's so good at talking. He's so good at drawing things out of people too. He does he's a great conversationalist. Really super wonderful. And I mean, Nathan, I don't know if you feel this way, because when we were on his show and we talked about it there, like we're well past the deconversion part. And this has come up other times on the show where we're sort of elder atheists now. If you look back, the movement, when it really started kicking off in the early aughties, that's 20 years ago. Like, that's a long time. And when we talk to someone like David, we kind of forget, like, this is something that just keeps happening and happening and happening. More and more people are doing it every day. Are there, like, was there a moment when you look back and were like, you know what, I'm totally past this religion stuff?
Yeah, probably. I mean, not even past the religious stuff, but more like I'm not that interested anymore in like kind of listening to debates about whether God exists or like trying to kind of goad other people into entering these debates. I think that was probably, I don't know, several years after the sort of deconversion, I guess. I mean, I think one difference with me and also you, like from some of the people he's talked to and some of the people who are in the deconversion Facebook group, where in my case, well, in both of our cases, like it was when we're relatively young, like that we became atheists. So we didn't have fully formed communities around us that, or like, you know, families that we were in and so on, or like, you know, having partners and, you know, and having kids potentially, which makes deconversion that much more difficult. Whereas for me, there was no really social hurdles or anything like that. It was purely kind of an intellectual thing.
Was there
Um,
like some of the personal stuff that he talked about, like the feelings of grief and loss, like loss of a friend? Was that
mm,
something that you had experienced?
I don't think so, really. I mean, no. Once I kind of took the leap, I don't think I really ever looked back or missed it. I mean, I think there were only I can't even think of specific times, but it's like where things are difficult and you're like, I know I wish there was a plan. But even then I don't think there was it's not really a sincere wish because it's not possible for there to be anyway. But yeah, what about
Right.
you? I mean, you were so young.
Yeah, I mean, I was
So
younger, but there are things that like I noticed, like taking some after speaking with David, kind of like checking myself, being like, like a lot of the baggage that I carried leaving religion, right? I mean, like Catholic guilt is a real thing. Blaming yourself for everything, shame about everything about your body, shame about everything you do. Like a lot of that is just gone, right? And it's really, I think there's something very important in there for people who, if they have just recently deconverted, to know that, yeah, like it gets better. This stuff goes away, right? It takes time. It's there, but yeah, it improves, and it improves in ways that like you won't even think about. I remember like one time being younger and just being in a situation that was really really scary, and then noticing later that I didn't pray, that I'd never thought about God. I never thought. I was like, wow, like that's weird. Like I'd been taught to do that. It had been like, trained almost as like a reflex, right? And then suddenly that impulse just wasn't there anymore. So these things, they go away, and you can build up now. And we do have secular communities that help people through this, and that's really super fantastic. And one of the nice things about our numbers growing more and more and more is that there are more and more resources, and that's excellent. It's going to make it easier for people.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the more and more people who come out, like the easier it gets for everyone else. I mean, it's just sort of a perpetual thing. And I think that points to a question we talked a little bit about in the bonus section is this, why are we seeing such a rise in the nuns or the non-religious now? And it seems like that's probably part of the reason that there are these supportive communities you can enter. I mean, even virtual ones. Whereas before the internet, that would have been very difficult to
Mhm.
do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Tough to find your
So,
people. It's getting easier now, and there are more people.
mhm,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and David, it's coming from an amazing place. One of the things I found most interesting was that like his sense of grace, just from the name, I had thought it came from religion, but no, it came from people. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And he immediately identified, Christianity, the church, right, as being hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
That's astounding.
Yeah. I sort of think like, as I kind of listen to some more like deconversion stories, it's almost like people's morality like kind of just outgrows the church, like their morality can't really, it comes to a point, it doesn't even fit in the church's box anymore. And yeah, that's why what pushes them to leave.
Yeah, we hear about that a lot. So, hey, if you have those feelings of grief or loneliness, check out. Know that you're not alone. Know that there are those resources. They're available online. There are links below. Check out David's podcast if you want to hear other voices like yours, or if you're interested in telling your deconversion story, send him an email. He'll hook you up. It sounds great. Nathan, we seem to have gotten a lot of the business done pretty quickly today.
Yeah, a new record.
Yeah. Anything else to bring up?
We should just thank our patrons on Patreon, and
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
encourage people to like and subscribe if they like the content, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and check out the other podcasts on AU Studios as well. Who else do we need to? Oh, and of course, thank you to all the listeners. You guys are doing it. Be sure to send us a line drop us a line if there's something like this. If you have a deconversion story, or if you've noticed, like when you noticed things just got better when that rock was off your chest, makes a big difference. All right. Well, big shout out to everybody listening. Like and subscribe. Smash those buttons. Big thanks to Red Japan. And we'll see you later. Bye-bye.